I'd like to start with you, Dana. Your series, Top Secret America, an absolutely chilling description of a kind of national security concerns and bureaucracy run amok. How did you get the idea for it, and how did you go about assembling all that information?
Well, briefly, I'd covered intelligence and the military after 9/11. And when we got done trying to figure out what had happened on 9/11, who Al-Qaeda was, we eventually started saying, well, what's the government doing? What is the government doing to try to fight this war that was now called the Global War on Terrorism? And unlike the military, which is a relatively open organization compared to the intelligence world, you couldn't find out because it was all classified. All of it was classified. So, that's the secrecy veil that we were up against.
And the idea behind the story, and why I described it as chilling, is there are so many agencies, and there's redundancy, compartmentalization, and everything, that no one can possibly get a handle on it.
General Clapper, who is now the Director of National Intelligence, he actually said that there is one person who knows it all, and that's God.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't created by God, though. Did you at any time, when you had to verify the information, did anyone say, please don't publish this? Or please don't publish parts of it? And did you hold anything back?
Oh, we did.
Omit anything?
You have, in national security reporting, what you're balancing is things that really need to be kept secret, either because lives are at stake, an operation that's not controversial and clearly doesn't cross some line is at stake, and a whole other realm of things that really are described on a case-by-case basis and is hard to imagine unless you're getting into that realm.
Adam, in your documentary, you concentrated on a 31-year-old man, Henry Glover, what happened to him. Can you just tell us briefly his story and why you chose him to tell a larger story?
Yeah, so Henry Glover was 31-year-old man. He was a father of 4, and it was shortly after Hurricane Katrina. And what we understand is that he was going to get some goods that had been taken from a dime store. They were pots and pans and candles and stuff. And he was shot by a police officer. His brother and a Good Samaritan and another person rushed him for help. And so they sped him to this SWAT team outpost. The SWAT team had taken over this elementary school. And they showed up there and they thought that, hey, these guys, they know CPR, they can rush him to the hospital, they can treat him here, they probably have medical supplies, they'll help him. But they didn't help him. What they did is they physically attacked the able-bodied men, the three able-bodied men, and they left Henry Glover to bleed to death in the back of the car. And then the officers took Henry's body and the car that the Good Samaritan had been driving. They drove it over behind another police outpost, a police station, parked it on the banks of the Mississippi River, set it on fire, burned up Henry's body, and left him there and pretended that he was a piece of rubbish, that he was a piece of garbage, and that he hadn't been a human, and that it didn't matter.
When you poked into it, you were clearly running a risk. How did you get people to open up, including his brother, who I think was one of the 3, wasn't he?
Yeah, there's kind of 2 important things here. And one is first that the bigger challenge, rather than the awesome action movie stuff, like getting threatened by cops, that kind of stuff, the bigger challenge, honestly, it was bureaucratic. And that's how these things often are, is that the secret agent here, the secret weapon, was our attorney. Every single piece of documentation that we wanted to get, we had to threaten to sue to get. So Lori Mintz, the attorney who worked with me on the TV and on the stories, the print stories, she was the one who did a lot of the hard work. The second piece about this sort of fear and of being menaced by the police, I met with a source who said, I don't want anyone to know I'm meeting with you because the police will, if they find out, they'll end up doing something like planting 3 pounds of cocaine in my car. I thought, well, this person's crazy. This person's watched too much Training Day, too much Serpico. And then after I started interviewing a lot of cops who had actually done that, I realized, oh, you know, I should have been like, yeah, I was kind of naive. Like, this actually is how it goes down in New Orleans.
Yeah, yeah. Michael, speaking of starting at the top instead of the bottom, your piece on General McChrystal had obviously a huge impact, but I read somewhere that you were surprised by that. Did you not know what you had when you printed it?
One of the reasons I was shocked by the response, and still am, is that, you know, I've been covering the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan for 5 years, and usually no one cares about anything you write. And I don't even mean that ironically. It's just like there's jaw-dropping stuff that comes out every week about what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan that leaves nary a dent in our public consciousness. So my thinking at the time was, I knew it was good material, but my thinking was, well, you know, maybe they'll talk about it on cable for a couple hours, and you know, and then I'll go on my merry way and, you know, write a book about that time with a crazy general.
How did you, in a way, get yourself into their confidence, and did you have to establish any ground rules at all?
I didn't have to establish any. I mean, in this case, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not that dramatic. I wanted to do a profile of General McChrystal for Rolling Stone. I emailed the press guy, said, hey, I'd love to do a profile of General McChrystal. He said, come to Paris next week. I said, okay. I showed up in Paris, and we sort of said, okay, and I said, here's the story. I'd love to do a story with, like, part of you guys hanging out in Paris, in Europe, and the other part in Kabul. And then they said, yeah, come on in, you know, and I just sort of followed them around with a tape recorder and a notepad. And a lot of the stuff that ended up getting them, that became sort of controversial, was all said within the first 24, 48 hours. Mm-hmm. So much so that I knew I kind of already had my story, but then, you know, the volcano went off in Iceland, and I kind of ended up getting stuck with them for longer, which was advantageous in the end, because I got to really sense of who they were.
Okay. Wilbert, can you tell us this kind of quickly how journalism attracted you when you were in Angola, and what it meant to you and what it did for you?
I discovered when I got off death row, I discovered myself in, you know, what was at that time the bloodiest prison in the United States, and I saw things that were just absolutely horrific. I had never, you know, been in a world like this before, and I just couldn't believe that people knew what was going on. They couldn't know. The rest of society couldn't know, because if they did know, I don't think they'd go for what was going on. And, you know, you send people to prison, yes, to be punished, but not what's taking place in the prison. And by then I had decided I wanted to be a writer, so I decided I would try telling what was going on.
Did you have to run the stories by anyone, by the warden, before printing them?
We had to run it through Peggy Gresham. She was our supervisor at the time, and she was the assistant to the warden, because the warden didn't have time to deal with that. So she read it, and all she wanted. In fact, she went back to school and took a 6 month, I think, studied journalism just to see what it's about, you know, to be a more effective supervisor, because she knew what the director wanted. He wanted a very real publication, just like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and any other. And he took pride in it, especially after we started winning awards. But, you know.